it's this stunning pottery that we may all be so familiar with, that people painted. I want to mention right here that the Amerind has a particular interest in the Mimbres area because in the 1970s, Charles DePeso, who was then director of the Amerind, and was the first director of the Amerind, archaeological director, excavated at the Wind Mountain site, which is right here at the tip of this arrow. And you can see it's outside the Mimbres Valley. And if you were to look at the report on the Wind Mountain site, you would see that although it had a whole lot of earlier pit houses, there's only 10 Pueblo rooms. And you might think, geez, why did DePeso do that? He did it for a number of reasons, but it turns out that this kind of small site outside the Mimbres Valley is extremely important for understanding what's happening in the Mimbres. I can't talk about that today, but you should know that the Amerind had an important role in Mimbres archaeology. So Mimbres archaeology starts in a very ordinary way and continues for about 800 years in a very ordinary way. It starts, as much of the Southwest does, with a time period called early pit house or something like that, where people start to make plain pottery. And they start in the Mimbres, as in much of the rest of the Southwest, at about 200 AD, making pottery. They hadn't made pottery earlier. They start making pottery. It's an interesting question why they start. Again, not something I'm going to talk about today. And sometime 300 or 400 AD, maybe a bit earlier, they start making this nice red slipped pottery. That is, they put a red slip, a red coloring, a pigment that fires red that's suspended in water, and they just put it over the entire vessel, as you can see in this vessel right here. And that's the only kind of pottery they make for this big chunk of time that you see here, 200 to 750. They build their houses, their sites, on the tops of these very steep hills. This is the Mimbres River right here. You can see the riparian vegetation, the cottonwoods, and it's flowing from left to right, from north to south here. And across the river is the McAnally site on the top of that hill. It's an early pit house period site. It is a very steep hill. We excavated this. I was part of the Mimbres Foundation in the 1970s, run by Stephen LeBlanc. And we excavated on this site up here. In fact, Dr. Minnis, who you will meet next week, ran the excavations up there. And one of the things they excavated, well, they excavated parts of several houses, but they excavated this whole pit house right here at the bottom. You can see the meter stick and the chalkboard and the north arrow are on the floor of the pit house. And so you can see it's kind of oval. It's pretty big. And this thing right here is the ramp entry. And there was a little smear of ash right here. There was no formal hearth, but it's where they had a fire. And it's not particularly deep. The soil at the tops of these hills is very consolidated, and they probably didn't want a deep structure, but it would have been a lot of work to build one, had they wanted to. Okay, so that goes several hundred years. And then we get to the late pit house period. And the difference here is that we see painted pottery for the first time, painted designs. And the first thing people do is they take a sort of reddish, brownish background, like the red slip-ish you saw earlier, kind of, and they paint red designs on it. And you can see the designs are geometric and not particularly complicated. Pretty standard across much of the Southwest to see this sort of first painting. And then they start to lighten the background. Probably about 800 AD, they start to lighten the background to a white, still maintaining the red paint, but very quickly they start doing a black paint that fires black instead of a red paint. Perhaps for the most contrast between the design and the background. And so these are a couple of the type of the pots that you might see, 800, 850, 900-ish, 925 or so, black on whites. And they're also making corrugated plain pots still, of course. They're adding some corrugations. You can see the little corrugations up here by the necks of these pots. Fingernail punches on this one. And they're making much bigger pots as well in this same plain corrugated style. And again, this is pretty standard across much of the Southwest. In fact, much of the Puebloan Southwest at this point in time. The Hohokam are always doing something a little different. And they start to move their sites down onto the first bench off those high knolls. This one, this artist reconstruction of one, is still on a high knoll, and that does happen. The pit structures tend to be rectangular at this point in time instead of circular. So again, things are pretty ordinary. The pottery is really nice, but you know, you don't gasp when you see it. So then we come to 1000 AD-ish. And that's called the Mimbres Classic period. This is when we first see pueblos, that is contiguous rooms made from cobbles, in this case, river cobbles from the Mimbres River, and very different in setup than the pit structures we saw earlier. You can see a map here of the Maddox site, and you can see some of the contiguous rooms here, and you can imagine how that setup is a lot different socially in terms of your household, in terms of your relationships with other households, than if you were living single family in a pit structure. For the first time, we see a continuation of this nice black on white pottery, but it gets a lot fancier. And you can see there's a nice geometric here with a feather design. And look at those really fine rim bands right there. Those are painted with a yucca fiber brush, drawing it around the rim of the pot. That takes a lot of skill, something I certainly don't have. But at the same time, we start to see some very interesting representational, naturalistic, they've been called a number of things, figurative is good, designs painted on these bowls. Now, it is true that from the earliest black on white that you do get animals painted on them, but not very many. Different kinds of animals too than you see later. But in the classic period, we start to see people, and we start to see these narrative scenes that I'm going to come back to, and we'll come back to this particular bowl too. All of this happens in a very brief time period, 1000 to 1130 at the most, So I told you they have ordinary architecture. You could even describe the architecture as barely functional, but it did function. So what you see here in this picture is you see a series of rooms that we at the Mimbres Foundation excavated down to the floors, and you can see this person right here is standing on the floor of the room. So when we say there's surface structures, they're not precisely on the surface. And you can see that you don't see many rocks in these walls, in part because we haven't cleaned off the walls very well, because the rocks look like these rocks right here. They are unshaped river cobbles from the Mimbres River bottom, which is right here. And they're held together with quite a bit of adobe mud to hold them together. But they did work. The walls would have extended above what you see, the ground surface here, and they would have formed a set of room blocks, they're called, like you see the artist has depicted here at the Galaz site. Clusters of rooms, room blocks that people lived in. And so this part is very ordinary. This is similar to what we see to the north in the ancestral Puebloan area. Not quite the same, but similar. And and in some ways similar to the Hohokam. Okay, so very ordinary, nothing spectacular. So what is it that makes Mimbres special? The classic period, this 130-year period, is marked by changes in a number of things, but there are three that I want to talk about today. It's marked by changes in the religious architecture, specifically in kivas. It's marked by changes in the ritual economy, and I'm going to focus on macaws and parrots, because they're cool. And it is marked by changes in the ceramic imagery, some of which I've already mentioned, but some of that imagery is shared with Mesoamerica. So, okay, let's do each of these in turn. Okay, so what about the great kivas? So people in the Mimbres region have been building great kivas since certainly 750 AD. Perhaps earlier, there are larger structures earlier, but they don't pop out as great kivas. Near the end of and so that's pretty ordinary. And what they do is when a great kiva needs to be retired, as some of us might retire a church today, desanctified, that building is burned, and often the walls are pushed in and the roof is made to collapse onto the floor. But then that great kiva is replaced with another great kiva. Near the end of the late pit house period, the early to mid 900s or so, the great kivas, most of them are burned, but they're not replaced. And so as we come into the classic period, by 1000-ish, early 1000s, there are no great kivas being used, probably. You know, things are always squishy in archaeology. I think to most of us, this suggests a large-scale change in religious architecture, certainly, because there are no great kivas, and it's not clear to me, I'm in a minority here, where people are doing their ceremonies. Everybody says, well, they're doing them in the plazas between those room blocks that you saw on that Galaz artist reconstruction. But we've never excavated enough out in those plazas to see if there are surfaces that people might have stomped down, made formal by putting some adobe mud out there. You know, we just don't know. So I'm less convinced than other people are that that's where people were doing it, but it's the only logical place. So there's a large scale change in the architecture from kivas, great kivas, to no kivas. Okay, what else happens? Pretty much at the beginning of the classic period, we start seeing macaws, particularly scarlet macaws. And you see a picture of these birds here on the left. They are stunningly beautiful, multicolored. They have those long tail feathers, two of which are scarlet and probably very important in ceremonies, but other of the feathers may well have been as well. So in that late pit house period, before 1000 AD, there are two birds that we have found in Mimbres sites. There is one thick-billed parrot. Those are pretty small. I see, you can't see me. Well, sort of 8 inches plus a tail. They're parrots, they're green, they're very pretty. They are not scarlet macaws. And there is one military macaw, about the size of a scarlet macaw, just a bit smaller. And it is also green, very pretty. And it's got a couple other colors in there, but it's not scarlet. And so, you know, these birds are starting there a little bit in the late pit house period. In the classic period, there are 6 or 7 sites in the Mimbres region that have birds like this. There are other kinds of birds we could talk about, but we're focusing on macaws and parrots. There are 21 birds that are probably scarlet macaws. So you can see that when they start into the scarlet macaw thing, they do it a lot bigger than this thick-billed parrot military macaw thing. 11 of those, and there's 28 or 29 total birds. There's some thick-billed parrots, a couple other things going on in the classic period. 11 of those 28, 29 are at the Galaz site. We'll come back to that, how important that is. Okay, so where do scarlet macaws come from? I should point out that thick-billed parrots come from this area right here in the Four Corners, the international Four Corners. They sometimes do come up into the United States. And I can see this star is a little off whack. It should be right here. That designates Mimbres. Military macaws are from the Sierra Madres, from the pine forests, and they're from a little farther south than the thick-billed parrots. Scarlet macaws are from the rainforests of Central and South America. You can see the distribution here on this smaller map. And the closest scarlet macaws in their native habitat are right here in the Huasteca, an area of Mexico called the Huasteca. And that's about 700 miles straight line from Mimbres to the Huasteca. So that's a good chunk of distance there. And scarlet macaws do not by accident fly into the Mimbres or any such thing like that. I point out this nice Mimbres bowl. Here we have a man standing on a tree branch. We know he's a man because his hair is plaited. And he is taking baby birds out of the cavity in the tree. There's perhaps a parent bird up here above him. And he's putting them into this little cage-like thing here. And so this is certainly a way that people could have in the past and do today gather birds like macaws in their native habitat. Okay, so originally a couple of my colleagues and I, Mark Thompson, Christina Wyckoff, and I, proposed that people went to the Huasteca and they brought scarlet macaws back, probably pretty young ones, to the Mimbres to raise. Or that people from the Huasteca came to the Mimbres for whatever reason and brought the birds. And that seemed, in 2014, not too long ago, like a plausible explanation for how the birds got there, because there was little evidence, almost none, of breeding these birds in the southwestern United States, northwest Mexico, before 1200, 1250. And Mimbres Classic is before that. So, however, we've done some ancient DNA analysis. That's what this stands for right here, ancient DNA. And there are 6 what are called haplogroups, genetic groups of scarlet macaws. One of them's only in South America, so we're only dealing with 5. So if you were out there in the wild and you were gathering a scarlet macaw from here and one from that nest over there and one from 20 miles away and that sort of thing, then you would expect to get lots of different haplogroups because these haplogroups mix. You know, there isn't one haplogroup here and then 100 miles away there's a second haplogroup. It turns out that the ancient DNA, all of the macaws, we've only done 3 from the Mimbres, are from haplogroup 6, which is the rarest haplogroup. If you look at Chaco Canyon, where the macaws are pretty much contemporary, some are a little earlier, than with the ones in the Mimbres, they are all haplogroup 6. Oh my gosh. And we haven't found one yet that isn't haplogroup 6. You could not do this by just gathering random scarlet macaws out there in the wild. You wouldn't end up with this. And so what the authors of the ancient DNA article suggested was that there has to be a breeding center someplace between the Huasteca and the Mimbres. And maybe there's one in Chaco too. It is possible to breed these birds this far north. You have to know what you're doing. Was Mimbres the breeding center or a breeding center? It's probably only one. We don't know. There's tiny bits of evidence that I can talk about later if you want me to. Okay, so they're not coming directly from the Huasteca. A few might be, but most of them are not, apparently. What came with the macaws, though, regardless of whether they came from the Huasteca or from whether they came from a breeding center closer in. First of all, you have to know how to raise these things, or they're going to die. And these birds are probably, they're so spectacular, and they're, because of their colors, their bright colors, and the red especially, but there are other colors as well, they're probably used in rituals. They're probably very important for that reason. And so there's probably some esoteric knowledge, some ritual religious knowledge that has to come with their use as well. You don't just get a macaw because you want one as a pet. And so that kind of knowledge would be necessary for you to have a macaw. So here's where we get into the Mesoamerican stuff. Mark Thompson, one of my colleagues in this, has shown that a lot of the scenes that we see with people and birds, especially in macaws, are narrative scenes on this Mimbres classic black on white pottery. And a lot of the narrative scenes seem to relate to the Hero Twins saga. What is the Hero Twins saga? It is an important written description of Mesoamerican, much of Mesoamerican cosmology and religion. We see parts of it, all of it maybe, in Pueblo religion today and in historic times. It's written down, one version of it, in the Popol Vuh. It was written down in the 1600s. It's essentially the origin story of, that is the basis for much of the religion, especially in the Mayan area. It details the Hero Twins' miraculous birth, their epic adventures. Of course, they have epic adventures, and their reincarnation is the sun and the moon. They are tricksters, not surprisingly. They vanquish monsters, part of their epic adventures. They willingly suffer death. So let's look at why we think that we see the Hero Twins, this material, this saga, this story from Mesoamerica on Mimbres bowls. Okay, who are the Hero Twins? The older twin is generally depicted as larger. He's right-handed, he's masculine, and his avatars are the sun and deer. The younger twin is smaller, he's left-handed. He often, not always, often has a feminine guise, and his avatars are the moon and rabbits. And you know that many Native Americans, instead of seeing a man in the moon, as I might, see a rabbit in the moon. And so there's a relationship there. If you look at this bowl, you might think at first you were looking at a man and a woman. And if you knew Mimbres iconography, you would think that the man was this figure right here, because he's wearing a sash. An archaeologist named Merritt Munson has been able to associate dress with sexual characteristics on other bowls, so that we know that figures wearing sashes are men, figures wearing string aprons are women. If you look at this man, if you look at his right arm, it's larger than his left arm. If you look at her left arm, it's larger than her right arm. So we're seeing the older twin, masculine, the younger twin, left-handed, in a feminine guise. Okay, you might say, correctly, that's not that convincing. Okay, so let me show you another bowl. And I could show you many bowls, but I'm only going to show you 3. The twins as fish. One of the stories in the Popol Vuh, in the Hero Twins saga, the twins challenge the gods of the underworld to the ball game. And the twins lose. And the gods of the underworld say, well, we're going to kill you. And the twins say, well, that's fine. But what we want you to do is we want you to grind up our bones and throw them in the river. And the gods of the underworld think, well, what's the harm in that? And so they say, sure, we'll do that. And so they grind up the twins' bones, they throw them in the river. The twins become fish, often called catfish, after their death, after they're thrown into the river. Fish are, this is kind of a tangent, but I love this. Fish are symbols for life after death in the saga, in this cosmology. They're symbols for passage through the watery underworld. They are the souls of the dead, of course. So think of that the next time you eat a fish. The fish in their journey along this river are transformed into young boys, and they come up onto land as young boys. So what we think we're seeing here is we think we're seeing a catfish. It's got the whiskers right here. And it's got arms and legs, sort of semi-human. And here are the two boys. These are clearly boys. One is larger than the other. Could be perspective, but could be the older twin and the younger twin. Their arms are different sizes, you notice. They've both got a larger arm and a smaller arm. And although it's not quite possible to tell which arm is which, we might think that the right-handed twin was the younger one and the right arm was larger, and vice versa for the older twin. So there's a passage from the Popol Vuh that seems to be represented pretty clearly here in Mimbres, on a Mimbres bowl. Let's look at another two Mimbres bowls showing, I think, the same thing. One of the monsters they vanquish is a monster called Seven Macaw, which in the original story is a macaw. It's a big bird. It's a monstrous bird. They go to kill the macaw the first time, and the macaw, the monster, rips the arm off the elder twin. Now, we think that in Mimbres, this giant monster is often depicted as a bear. And there's actually a monstrous beaver as well. So here we see a bear, and right by its mouth is an arm, just an arm sitting there. Here's a second bowl. We have a bear, and what happens after he rips the arm off the elder twin and the twins run away is the younger twin goes back. He pokes the bear's eyes out, or he puts his fingers in the bear's eyes. He grabs his elder brother's arm and he runs back with it and puts it on the elder brother. So we think that this is what we're seeing here. We're seeing the younger twin with his fingers near the bear's eyes, about to poke at the bear's eyes and grab the arm. And we're going to see another bowl eventually that will show this same. So what we're saying is that the Great Kivas end in the 900s, maybe the early 1000s. They don't build them anymore. They don't build them at any point during the Classic period. And that the advent of scarlet macaws and this hero twins iconography is perhaps a new religion that comes in at the beginning of the Classic period. When we originally thought about macaws and this iconography, we thought that the macaws were coming up from the Huasteca and that the iconography came with them. Now we're not, of course, sure about that because the macaws may not have come from the Huasteca. It doesn't look like they did. But somehow the iconography comes at the same time. Or perhaps it was there all along and it becomes the most prominent part of the religion, whereas it had been in the background before. We just don't know the answer to that at this point. So we think this new religion included scarlet macaws and Mesoamerican derived iconography. Although, as I said, the iconography could have been there all along. Let's look at these two bowls just for fun. There are 36 or 38 bowls with macaws or parrots on them from the Mimbres that we know about. And this is out of a corpus of several thousand. So there aren't many of them, but they're clearly important bowls. So here we have a bowl that we saw before. We have a woman. She's clearly a woman. She's wearing the string apron, but she also has breasts. And she has a bird mask on. And she has a macaw. She's got a couple sticks. She's got a staff and a stick. And she's got a macaw or a parrot. We have a man. He's got the sash. He has penis, so we know he's a man too. He has a staff, and he has a bird mask on. He has a hoop. He has a bird with a hoop. They have a bird and basket. There's a macaw there, or a bird there. And so this is clearly a narrative scene. Are these the hero twins? We've got a woman and a man. They could be just a woman and a man. We don't know. There's nothing that suggests that they're hero twins except we have a woman and a man. But the chances are high that we'd have that. So, nice narrative scene. Here we have something that's a little more clearly the hero twins. We have, let me think, which one is which here? We have the larger one right here. They've got the arms, but this is probably the older hero twin, even though he's a little smaller here because his arm has been ripped off and reattached, you see right here. And this one's clearly male because he's wearing the sash. But the important thing here that we often see with hero twins or with people is that they're wearing fish hats. And we think that the fish hats are the symbol that show that they're dead. They're the souls of the dead in the watery underworld. Okay, those are the last two pictures. Okay, so what happened after 1130 AD? There's a major reorganization. The people are still living in pueblos. A lot of people pull out of the Mimbres Valley. They go to the east side of the Black Range, which is the mountains that rise to 10,000 feet on the east side of the Mimbres River Valley. They pop over there into the Rio Grande River Valley. They live there. They go some other places. There don't seem to be as many people. They build often, but not always, their pueblo rooms out of adobe. There are no Mimbres black on white ceramics. They make other kinds of ceramics, including very nice ceramics. You can see this is a nice, what's called a plius red and size jar. Nice incisions here, and you can see the red slip down here. But we don't see a continuation of the Mimbres style at all. And there's a whole lot of new types of pottery. You know, people have postulated a lot of things. They postulated drought, certainly the environment gets. It goes back to normal. It had been particularly good for that 130-year span there that the Mimbres Classic covers, but it goes back to normal. That's not necessarily a drought. Were there too many people for the valley? Probably not. There are a lot of people in the valley, but probably not. Did they trash the environment? Because, you know, people, we do trash environments. Again, probably more people could have stayed in the Mimbres Valley than did. And so any of these things are possible, environmental change, too many people, trashed environment, and they all may have played a role here. But one of the things that traditional models have left out is that social ritual change. Did people practice this new religion for a little while, 100+ years, and then when the environment started to go back to normal, things weren't quite as perfect. Did they say, geez, this isn't working. You know, let's not do this anymore. We do know that the hero twins, as I mentioned before, are part of Puebloan religion today. We know that Great Kivas continued in much of the area to the north of the Mimbres, in Mogollon areas to the north, and farther north in the ancestral Pueblo area. And so did those kinds of religions merge together more at that point? We don't know, but certainly social and religious change has to be something related to what happened after 1130. And who are the descendants of the Mimbres? We don't know that. As archaeologists, we don't know that either. Certainly, there could be Mimbres descendants in many, most, all of the Pueblos, Hohokam, whatnot, today. Okay. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the pots and pot hunting. There are no pristine Mimbres sites today because those pots, those beautiful pots, have such market value, have had such market value in the past and today, that pot hunters, looters, criminals in my mind, have gone in and destroyed the sites. There are two sites in the Mimbres Valley that seem to be ritual centers. The Galaz site that I mentioned right at the beginning is at the north end of the Mimbres Valley. Old Town is at the south end of the Mimbres Valley, probably those are important locations. If you look at this aerial map of Old Town, it's right on the edge. The Mimbres River is out in here, and this is the bluff that the site is built on. And you can see the site is it's pretty obvious where the site is. There are a couple bulldozer cuts. That's this right here, and this back in here. This site, by the way, is on Bureau of Land Management land. It's on federal land. Everybody who was here illegally was committing a felony. All of these holes are potholes that the looters have made over the years. And Daryl Creel from the University of Texas excavated at Old Town for many years. He was hard-pressed to find any intact deposits. He found some on the north end of the site in here. And out beyond it, there are some pit houses, but he really had a hard time finding anything intact. So it's essentially destroyed. BLM is doing a much better job of protecting it now, but in part that's because there's nothing left for anybody to dig up and sell. Here on the Galaz side, at the north end of the valley, where the Mimbres Foundation and I, among many other people, worked for a couple seasons. This is the site right here, and you see Frank Turley with his bulldozer right there. He bought the rights from the Galaz family to bulldoze the site for pots so that he could sell them. Mr. Galaz told me that he was willing for Frank Turley to do this because he was perpetually kicking people off the site, looters. This is private land, and they had no right to be there. And they would come out and dig, and he would kick them off. And he said one night he went out, and people were digging under tarps with lanterns, and they shot at him. And he said that was it, that he wanted the site gone. And so he let Frank Turley, for money, come in and bulldoze the site. Turley let us, once he had bulldozed the classic site, he let us excavate some of the pit houses around the classic site for a few months. So both of the ritual centers for Mimbres are gone. Now, can you imagine what we could have learned if we could have excavated intact deposits on these sites? It's just amazing. So don't pot hunt. You probably all know this, probably preaching to the choir, but in case I'm not, don't buy artifacts, please, because it fuels the market. Instead, buy replicas. There are some wonderful replicas out there that people make. Support your local replica maker. Okay, as you might be able to tell, I hope, we still have a lot to learn. We don't have a clue what much of the iconography on Mimbres pots means. Some people are starting into thinking about these geometric designs on Mimbres pots that are far more common than the representational figurative designs are. For example, if you look at this pot right here, we have the younger hero twin, we think, gouging the eyes out of 7 macaw as a bear. But look at the bears. There are these are mirror images in theory, but the two bears have different designs in their bodies. What does that mean? Why did the painter do that? We don't know. There's an incredible amount still to be done of research, just looking at the vessels and the designs painted on them themselves. So that is what I have to say. Annie?
All right, it does look, Pat, like you have some questions in the Q&A down there.
Okay, just a second. Can I find the Q&A?
Towards the bottom.
Just a second. Let's do, yes, okay, there, okay. All right. Okay, I'll start. I guess that's the one. Okay, what is the relationship between Mimbres people and the Pueblo people to the north, other groups to the east and west? Okay, I'm imagining everyone can hear me. So, but they can't see the questions. Okay, no matter. There isn't much, honestly. If you look at Mimbres pottery, the black and white pottery during the classic period from 1000 to 1130, if you look at that, then you don't see much of that outside that region on my first map, outside of southwestern New Mexico, a little bit into northern Chihuahua and Sonora, a little bit into eastern Arizona. There doesn't seem to be a major relationship between people living in that area and people beyond it. I mentioned that Chaco Canyon, the height of Chaco Canyon is almost exactly the same time as the height of Mimbres. That can't be a coincidence. But yet don't see Mimbres pottery, which is the artifact we'd expect to see, would hope to see, in Chacoan sites, nor do we see Chaco artifacts, Chaco pottery, in Mimbres sites. And so they both have macaws, lots of scarlet macaws, but we don't understand if there was a relationship, and if so, what it was. Groups to the east and west, not much relationship with the Hohokam out here in the Tucson area. East is the Jornada Magallon, which is, they're not doing as much agriculture. There's not as many people. There are Mimbres sites with a lot of Mimbres pottery on them in the El Paso area, for example, all the way over to the Sierra Blancas. And then it pretty much peters out. There are people working on those relationships, on how those are related to Mimbres and how Mimbres relates to them at the moment. But that's about what I can say. Who are the descendant communities that exist today? As I said, we don't know. We don't know. Zuni claims Mimbres. Hopi probably claims Mimbres. I'm out on a limb here because I don't know who claims what really. But as I said, it's likely, people have moved around a lot in the last 1,000 years, and it's likely that there are descendants of people who lived in the Mimbres region in many of the pueblos today, if not all of them. And in the Hohokam, there's no reason people couldn't have moved from the Mimbres to the Hohokam. We all know people, we may have done it ourselves, who have moved to different countries and learned the language and learned the customs and become French, become Nigerian, become whatever. So we just don't know the answer to that. Archaeologically, Pueblo people have different things to say about that than I do. How did the cliff dwellers fit into Mimbres chronology? Later habitation. I'm imagining okay, the question is, how did the cliff dwellers fit into Mimbres chronology? Later habitation than in lower river sites, more like later Pueblo and P3 influence. I'm imagining you're talking about the Gila cliff dwellings, which are to the north, which are a national monument, national park, which are to the north of the Mimbres Valley, about a 1.5 2 hour drive. Nice place. Those cliff dwellings date, there are tree ring dates from them, which is pretty cool. They date to the 1270s, 1280s. And there is the bone of a thick-billed parrot and a partial scarlet macaw from there as well. So the use of those birds continues through time. That 1270, 1280, late 1200s time period is a very difficult time in the ancestral Puebloan area. You know that a lot of people moved out of Mesa Verde and moved to the northern Rio Grande and probably some other places, but clearly moved to the northern Rio Grande. And I think that those people who lived in the Gila cliff dwellings, there's a very short period of time they lived there, 20 years. I think they were sort of refugees escaping social discord And they found the cliff dwellings. It's very high elevation, but you can do agriculture up there. There's a lot of water. There's some agricultural land. It's not a bad place. And they lived there for a while, a short while, and then they moved out. There weren't many people. There are 20 or 30 rooms, as I remember it, in the cliff dwellings themselves, and probably some other sites around that date to that. But they're significantly later than the than what's happening in the Mimbres. They're probably not the same group of people, although they are not from Mesa Verde. They have pottery made in the region. Okay. So those are the questions I see, unless, have I?
I do believe that you have some more. You might need
Okay,
to
how do I find them?
perhaps scroll down.
I'm trying. Oh, duh. This technology is, yeah, there. Have we found any indication of class distinctions within classic Mimbres sites? Yes and no. There don't appear to be elites. Like there were at Chaco, people who ran things, in a political, social sense. We do think that there are religious leaders. There's the occasional burial that's really different. There are people, 4 or 5 maybe, in the Mimbres Valley who are buried with macaws, for example. But a couple of them are kids, and so there are distinctions among people, but they're the kinds of distinctions you would expect to find in a society without elites. There are distinctions, religious leaders, non-religious leaders, men, women, children, those sorts of things. It's very different than Chaco, which is cool. Okay. There is a red slip pottery at Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, and some evidence on east in central southern Illinois. Is it possible there was influence either from Cahokia to Southwest Mimbres? Probably not. Probably not. Red slip on a pot on pottery is a pretty common thing to do around the world. With that being said, one of the things that Mark and Christina and I, when we were thinking about moving macaws from the Huasteca to Mimbres, one of the kinds of literature in archaeology and anthropology we read was literature about long distance trips, about people in non-industrialized societies getting out there and walking to places that they either knew about or they knew what the route was going to be, from stories they had been told, and going to, for them, and for any of us it would have been, exotic places, like for people from the Mimbres walking to the Huasteca and then walking home, hoping that you lived. So people could have known, have met, have walked east, walked into the plains. I don't know, maybe they could have gotten to Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, and perhaps walked home or stayed there for the rest of their lives. Certainly those things did happen. We forget about those things with cars, but people used to make really long trips. Okay. I'm looking. Hi, Marglyph. Have we done studies on the relationship between the numbers of fish petroglyphs in the nearby Jornada Magallanes? Oh gosh, Marglyph, if anybody's done it, you've done it. No. Rock art, there are a couple of, at Pony Hills, to the south of Old Town, there are 2 macaw petroglyphs, rock art, that are life-size with the full tail feathers of macaws in profile. And they look just like a scarlet macaw, a big macaw. You can't tell it's a scarlet, but a big macaw. And so we know how important rock art petroglyphs, pictographs are. A study of fish petroglyphs would be wonderful. Comparing rock art in the Jornada to the east where they get some pretty fancy rock art, pictographs. And in the Mimbres, I think would be really important to do. I'm too old to do it though. Okay, can I say something about Mimbres rock art? Is it different from surrounding areas? We don't know. I don't know. There are people who know, but I don't know. Is the Pony Hill site to the east of the Mimbres Valley related to the Mimbres Classic period? Yes, probably. At least some of the petroglyphs there are designs we see on pottery, on Mimbres Classic pottery, but some are not. Like there, at Pony Hills, there are bear paws as petroglyphs, and you really don't see those on Mimbres pottery. And so one study could be, what do you see in the rock art that you don't see in the pots, and vice versa? And what does that mean? You know, why would you see that? Here's another question. Were there other trade items from Mesoamerica found in the Mimbres area other than parrots and macaws? Yes, but it's more complicated than that. The scarlet macaws are the obvious things that would come from the farthest away, 700 plus miles, if they're getting them from the Huasteca originally, whenever that was. We see marine shell, but that clearly comes from the Gulf of California. We see copper bells. Those could be smelted locally, but if they're not, they're coming from the west coast of Mexico along with the shell. Well, yeah. And so the macaws are potentially coming from a different part of Mexico, like a different coast, than the shell and the copper bells are, which I think is fascinating. Now, you can get macaws on the west coast of Mexico, but it's almost twice as far away. And so it is possible that the macaws and parrots originally, the breeding pair, came up from the west coast, and they picked up some shell or something along the way, and copper bells. Not clear. If you're in the Hohokam area, there's some other things that come from the west coast of Mexico, like mosaic mirrors, but we don't see them in the Mimbres. Okay, here's a question. Why do you think people in the Southwest could not have kept macaws as pets rather than as holders in a religious context? Even though great care and knowledge is required to keep macaws, isn't it possible others besides religious practitioners could have learned how to keep and raise them? I do think that's possible. I think it probably didn't happen, but I can't demonstrate it. I think anybody could have had the knowledge to keep and raise them. I think that these birds were probably so imbued with sacredness, for the lack of a better term, that the only people allowed to have them would be religious practitioners. But I can't demonstrate that. If you look, it's fascinating, if you look at the Mimbres bowls, and you look at the bowls with macaws, parrots, because sometimes you can't tell which is which, and humans, it's usually women who are handling the macaws. And so does this say something about women being religious practitioners? Don't know, might. Okay. Do you see the macaw and hero twin iconography and similar geometric designs in petroglyphs or pictographs in the Mimbres Valley? Yes, the macaw part, certainly. I don't know about the hero twin part. My guess is that they're there. What's out there that's not on the bowls very much are goggle-eyed figures in rock art. And goggle-eyed figures are often associated with Tlaloc, who is the rain god of the Aztecs. Probably has other names. And so there's that connection too. But I'd like to go back to, when you think about Mesoamerica and the Southwest, it's possible that all of these things were there. I mean, some people have said they came across the Bering Land Bridge with Paleo-Indians, all of these ideas, the hero twins as the origin saga, that kind of thing. have been there all along. And it was only at 1000 AD when people started painting specific designs and had a specific way of thinking about their religion that we actually see them archaeologically. So there's that part to think about too. Just a second, hold on. Okay. Okay, I have from Kelly Holt. Oh, okay. Something from Jose Luis in Mexico. Hi, Jose Luis. Could you please tell us some important relationships with North and West Mexico? I don't know this as well as Jose Luis knows it, in fact. In the Mimbres, those relationships are the marine shell and the copper bells. The marine shell in Mimbres is not like the marine shell in Hohokam. It's the same kinds. It's not as fancy. You don't get as many kinds of shell. And they're not making shell ornaments as far as we can tell in the Mimbres. So they're getting them from someplace else. There's quite a bit of shell in the Mimbres, marine shell. They're also using a little bit of freshwater shell. It seems to come from most recent studies from pretty far north on the coast, on the west coast in Mexico. But there's a lot a person could do with looking at shell in the Mimbres that hasn't been done yet. The copper bells are not as fancy as you get in West Mexico, but a study by Victoria Vargas has suggested that the copper bells are from West Mexico. There is raw copper on the ground. There was originally 150 years ago in Southwestern New Mexico. It's very famous for its copper mines now. And so the question is, could they have cold hammered this copper? I think it's a possibility. I actually don't know the answer to that. The disadvantage of Zoom is that we can't have a back and forth about this, that somebody in the audience can't say, oh, God, Pat, you're just wrong. And so we don't know that answer. But those seem to be the two things. It's certainly also possible that people, the occasional person, a small group of people, made trips to the west coast of Mexico and brought some things home. One of these important long distance voyage trips. Hi, Jupiter. What were bird feathers used for? We don't know the answer to that totally. In the Mimbres area, there are rock shelters, and a few of them, like 6, have macaw feathers in them. They have other bird feathers, but they have macaw feathers in them. Some of them, a couple of them, are attached to pajos, prayer sticks, still, because in rock shelters, these things preserve. And so we know they were using them for something like that. Generally in the rock shelters, the feathers are just separate. But one of the questions is, that we would like to be able to answer, is did they use the feathers for something different than they use the whole birds for? The whole birds, and only about 8 of 18 birds that we know have this information for, are whole. The rest of them are just partial birds or a single bird bone in the Mimbres. Are they using those? And those birds are all dying at a specific age. It used to be that we thought it was between 11 and 12 months. It's not as clear that that's when it is, but they're all the same age when they're dying, or when they're sacrificed. And so that's clearly something important there. But before they are sacrificed, they are plucked many times for their feathers. And you can see that on their bones. There are pits on their ulnas where they've been plucked many times and the bone hasn't redone itself. And so clearly they're using bird feathers. They're probably using a lot of them. Daryl Creel suggests that they're using millions of them, bird feathers in general. But if the bird feathers, but clearly the whole birds are valuable also because they're burying them and they're killing them, and they don't have to kill them. They could just keep getting feathers from them. So clearly there's two things going on here, feathers and whole birds. Okay. Mark Severson says, if you don't buy the idea that they moved to open air ceremonies after they stopped building great kivas, what do you think they're doing? I really, unfortunately, have to think that they're moving to open air ceremonies. I would just like some archaeological evidence that, which is really hard to come by, that they're using the plazas, that these open areas between the rim blocks are really plazas, and that they're using them for something. But I don't know where else they could be doing it, and they have to be doing ceremonies. On the other hand, the cool thing about it is that those open air ceremonies are going to be open to everyone. A ceremony in a great kiva isn't necessarily open to everyone, although some great kivas can hold a whole lot of people. But if you have it out in the open, you can't keep people from coming and observing. And so that speaks to this non-elite egalitarian ethos that we think is going on at this point in the Mimbres. Yes, Steve Danziger worked with us in the Mimbres Foundation in the summer of '77. Hi, Steve. Are you still an archaeologist? Okay, did Mimbres people provide turquoise to other cultures, to Mesoamerica? Probably not. There are a couple of turquoise sources. There's one down in Hachita, way to the south of the Mimbres Valley, but in the United States, near the town of Hachita, that probably provided turquoise to, that's probably one of the places people went in Mimbres to get turquoise. There could have also been turquoise close to the ground surface in around the copper mines there near the Mimbres Valley, what are now copper mines. Did they provide it to Mesoamerica? We used to think that. But apparently the Mesoamerican turquoise, which we now have a way of sourcing, chemically sourcing turquoise. And apparently the turquoise in Mesoamerica, like in Teotihuacan, I'm getting this wrong. In Mesoamerica around Mexico City, is from Mexico. It's not from the Southwest. And so that so-called trade item that you might think, well, they traded turquoise for macaws, that doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't look like the macaws are coming directly from the Huasteca anymore. So Shelley asks if the macaws could have come from Casas Grandes. Many of you know that I'm married to Paul Minnis, who's going to talk next week about Casas Grandes. And my answer is no. Paul's answer is maybe, but he's wrong. Casas Grandes doesn't get going until 1200, 1250 or so. And there is stuff there before that, but it's pretty scruffy. And so, sure, it's possible. But I just don't think it's very likely. I think it's more likely they were raising the macaws in the Mimbres Valley. But then how did the same haplogroup get to Chaco? We just don't know. Is there any cacao at Mimbres sites? I think so. There's so much problem with the cacao studies, though. It seemed for a while like they were finding cacao on every potsherd they analyzed. And so I just don't know how to answer that question. I'm skeptical. I think they did some sherds from the Mimbres Valley, from the Galaz site, and I think they found cacao, but I'm skeptical about its actual presence. Ooh. Is there an overlap in macaw husbandry and the harlequin quail? Could the Mimbreños have been particularly skilled at raising birds rather than just being religious? I don't know. I don't know if the harlequin quails are out in the Mimbres. That's just a thing I don't know. There are different kinds of birds found in Southwestern sites. Among them, prominently, is turkeys, and there have been a lot of turkey studies lately. There are turkeys in some Mimbres sites, but not in others. And some of them are domestic, some of them are semi-domestic, some of them have a wild genome, but are probably being fed and happy to be fed. And so, yes, they were taking care of birds. They were also getting wild birds. You find different birds, parts of different birds buried, especially in Great Kivas, in the fill, above the floors, above the roof fall, like wings of hawks and that kind of thing. Sometimes they're dedicatory items in kivas. But there's no consistency. It's not always a red-tailed hawk right wing under the central post hole in the Great Kiva. And so they're capturing different birds. They may well keep different birds. Corvids, jays and crows and ravens are easy to keep, relatively speaking. So yeah, that goes back to the pet question too. I just can't demonstrate it one way or the other. But birds are important in ritual today in Pueblo societies. We think, therefore, that they were important in the past. A tribal group from central Brazil, the Bororo people, have twin brothers in their cosmology, and the scarlet macaw is part of their lives from birth to death. They believe they are red macaws themselves. Have I heard of them? Not them in particular, but this is what I was talking about, that there are people, groups of people around the Americas, including the Iroquois, who have twins that seem to be like the hero twins, who share parts of the hero twins saga, and so, you know, it makes me think, I shouldn't say this publicly, it makes me think that coming across with Paleo-Indians 15,000, 18,000 years ago, coming across the Bering Straits, this hero twins story in some form isn't so far out there. It's so widespread in the Americas. Scarlet macaws I don't think the Iroquois have scarlet macaws, but I think they're an important bird in much of the Americas. Okay. Have there been studies done on the haplogroups of Pakime macaws? Great question. They're coming up. They're coming up. We're working on that. I'm not working on that personally, but others. There's a group of, probably 20 of us who are working on macaws around the Southwest, and others are working on that question. So hold on. We're all on the edge of our seats for that one. Will it be haplogroup 6? Okay. Rebecca Harkness. Hi, Rebecca. Daryl Creel did a bit of plaza work at Nan, correct? Is that the only excavation work that has been done on plazas? I think Harry Schaefer did some plaza work at Nan. Yes and no. It's the best plaza work that's been done at the Nan Ranch site in the Mimbres Valley. They did some, and they started to find wonderful things, pits that people were using to do different activities with, cremations, that sort of thing, along the edges, the outer edges of the rooms in the plazas. And so, and we did some extramural work with the Mimbres Foundation, but back in the 70s, that wasn't so common. And we didn't do it very methodically. If I were redoing what we did in the 70s, I would absolutely get out into those plazas and do some excavation. Elisa Villalpando, are all the fish, hi Elisa, are all fish representations the same? I remember some were even identified as some species from the northern Gulf of California. The fish representations are as varied as everything else on Mimbres pottery. Another great study for somebody. There was an article in the 80s maybe, where a fish guy identified some of the fish that he saw on Mimbres pots as specific species from the northern Gulf of California. My colleague, Mark Thompson, just rolls his eyes at that and says, these representations on Mimbres pots are symbolic. They are not real things out there. They are parts of stories that people are telling. Now, I'm not sure he's completely right, Mark, if you're on here, I'm sorry. And so maybe some of them are species from the northern Gulf of California, but people aren't just painting real life scenes that they see in everyday life. They're painting things that are important in their rituals, in their cosmology. They weren't refrigerator magnet symbols to them. So there's more to it, but fish are a great thing. Hi to Patricia from Mexico City. Gloria, does anyone have an interest in doing a DNA analysis of Buena Fe scarlet macaws from Paquimé? Yes, 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 yes. Buena Fe phase is the phase that would be equivalent to the classic Mimbres phase. And that would be a wonderful thing to do. And as I say, some people are starting into that. And at the moment, it's a matter of somebody going down. INA, the government agency, anthropology agency in Mexico, has given permission to do ancient DNA on the Paquimé macaws to this group. But somebody has to go to Casas Grandes, to the warehouse, and find the macaw bones. That's the thing that's holding us up at the moment. Okay, thank you. Is there any hint that the Mimbres oriented their sites or buildings with sunrise, sunset, or astronomy? Yes, there is. There is a great article in the Kiva, which is a journal of Southwestern archaeology and anthropology. And the articles are pretty easy to read, where a master's student did her thesis looking at the orientations of great kivas, of those ramps coming in. And I think she looked at whether they orient to a couple of the mountain peaks in the Mimbres Valley. And I think she, as I remember, she determined that they do. And I can't remember if she gets into sunrise, sunset, but there have been other studies of great kivas beyond the Mimbres region. And most great kivas, not all, but most are oriented to the east, in the quadrant from the east to the south. And so, yeah, they're doing something along those lines for a lot of them, but not for all of them. And those exceptions would be the interesting ones to look at too. Okay, Annie, I think that's it.
I think that is it also. I do see that Gary Smith has his hand raised. So Gary, if you have a question, if you could type it quickly, and we will go ahead and get things wrapped up. Oh, it looks like one more came up from Claudia.
Okay, I don't see it. Oh, just a second, because I'm not moving my thing. Oh, okay, Claudia. What are the differences and similarities between the Paquimenses and the Mimbreños? The people at Paquimé are later in time, but more importantly, there are elites at Paquimé, as Paul will talk about next week. And yeah, there are elites at Paquimé. And the cool thing to me about Mimbres is that even though you've got this fancy pottery, you've got people living in pueblos, we don't see any evidence of elites. We don't see any evidence of people in charge of things except religion. In charge of, who lives where, of who does what, that kind of thing. The people who are in charge of religion are in charge of religion, and that's extremely important, but they don't seem to have power over other people. I think, to me, that's the main difference. And Paquimé, the site of Paquimé, if any of you live in the Southwest and you've never been to Paquimé, you really have to go, because it's a spectacular site. And Mimbres' ordinary architecture doesn't look anything like it. Okay. Okay, where am I? Okay. I'm getting lots of thank yous. You're welcome. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. And Marglyph is going to start on the fish petroglyph study, so we're in good hands. Linda, hi Linda. What about war or conflict in Mimbres, as seems to appear in other areas? There's very little evidence for interpersonal conflict of any sort. Katie Bastian did her dissertation looking at human skeletal violence as you would see it on human skeletons, you know, injuries that you get from fending off a blow, that sort of thing. And there's much less of it in Mimbres than there is in other parts of the Southwest and Northwest Mexico. So that's an interesting thing too. For about 100 years, things were really good. Is Paquimé the Macaw Trade Center for the Mimbres? As probably not because of the time difference, but you might ask Paul that question next week. Archaeologists don't have to agree on things because the evidence isn't always clear. So anyway, so I would say no, but Paul might differ in that. Okay. All right. I think that's it, Annie. Oh,
I think that is it also, Pat. Thank you so much for providing our audience with your talk today. It means a great deal to all of us. We really appreciate your expertise and your time. So thank you very much. Clapping my hand.
thank you to the audience from Grand Junction, Iowa, and from all over. Oh my gosh, the United States and Mexico. I'm touched. You all must be really bored. All right, bye-bye.
Bye, Pat. And to all of our attendees, don't forget, next week we have Dr. Paul Minnis joining us. You can find a registration link on our Facebook page as well as our website. We hope to see you then. All right, have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.